Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining. Thanks for waiting for this kicking off. My name is Max Körbecher. I'm very happy to be your host for today. And let me shortly introduce myself before we jump over to the Sovereign Cloud community. So, I actually wear multiple hats. On the nighttime, I would say I'm more on the open source side, helping to kick off some different events like the Cloud Native Summit in Munich or the Kubernetes and Platform Engineering Meetup here in Munich. And we organize this through, a little NGO, German Verein, which will be relevant in a second. Besides that, I have also written a book about platform engineering for architects. And somewhere I have to earn also money. So that's my day job where we're kind of consulting, managing director, tech advisor head, where we help customers to build platforms, to do sovereign cloud, and to become cloud native as itself. But today is about the community aspect, which lays more on the open source side. And that's what we also I would like to give you an introduction to for today, our sovereign cloud community. The sovereign cloud community is like the idea of bringing together people who are interested in this topic, but without focusing too much on the one or other provider. So it's more like an open space where we can bring together different topics, different perspectives, and create a platform for exchanging on it. And sovereignty is not just like becoming independent, right? It's not about being an own kingdom and don't care about anyone else, because usually in the past it has led to a lot of conflicts. Sovereignty is about building trust and capabilities and create a selective independence where it is needed and where it is critical. So for today, we're right into it, talking about the sovereign cloud community, what we are working on, and then we go straight into the topic of sovereignty as a spectrum. Now, again, the sovereign cloud community is not just like randomly hanging somewhere in the air, but it's hanging under the so-called Förderverein for open source, cloud native, and artificial intelligence. And the NGO perspective is to help emphasize and bring people together working in such areas and make them and create for them an easy access to different kind of tools, to different knowledge, share their knowledge, network, and collaborate. So I might reference here and there to the OSCE. That's for me my abbreviation, which I use for the NGO. It's a little bit shorter than this very long name. And from that perspective, that's where we are organizing those events. And we are also open for everyone else to join it. Right now, we don't have yet the right structure, and that's one part what we are working on. But we'll come to that in a second. What we want to achieve with the community, and I gave already a short wrap up on it, is about the neutrality, is about knowledge networking and collaboration. Neutrality means for us, everyone is welcome. Also providers, also software developing companies are very welcome. But we have community rules for don't make too much marketing. It's about the pure problem solving aspect, about providing solutions, maybe open source components whatsoever, that helps someone to become more sovereign or gain a better knowledge about sovereignty. And this therefore should transfer into knowledge that we can give to you through webinars, through roundtables, through blog posts, whatsoever. With the networking aspect, we want to ensure and create a space where you and others can exchange your ideas and your perspectives. And this is already almost a little introduction to the topic of today, that sovereignty is literally more like a spectrum rather than a black and white story. And we discuss a lot about it with fear perspective, with kind of anger. They are bad people and so on. But I think that's all kind of a wrong perspective really to take. And well, to change the perspective what we have and to make things more happening, to engage with others, we need to do collaboration and foster a community that is working together to, have a better thinking, a better understanding together. We try to document and live stream everything what we are doing, but we're also aiming for doing some Chatham House rule, community circles where you most likely in person will meet or have the chance to meet in person, but where there's no recording, no documentation, just you and others sharing. But this is already about the plan for the future. And with this community, we're also taking on the challenges of actually Europe being very fragmented and having different spaces, having different perspective on sovereignty, because actually every country sees it slightly a little bit different. And therefore, we are looking for hosts, for country leads, for different countries to also deliver this content in a country-specific language. So the English one is like for general, for everyone. We had this morning already a session in German with the same content. And we're looking for incubating also in France and Poland, Italy, and other countries, the setup of a sovereign cloud community stream, however you want to call it. But all together in one community. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the comments and I will answer them as soon as I can. Now, what we are still working on, because we are in the early phase of setting up the community, is that we will set up a community channel for granting you access to communicate and chat with other people and connect with them. We will improve the website. For now, it's just a landing page, but we would like to have it in multiple languages, that you see directly the event calendar and adding up a blog post for you. And we are also in the phase of planning the next webinars, the next topics. If you have a topic that's interesting, or even would like to give a talk by yourself, or maybe a roundtable or a discussion ground, feel free to write us. In the end of the slides, I will show you the email address you can get in contact with us. The last 2 points, we are currently working to make a proposal to the OSCE about like how to manage potential members or interested parties who would like to organize also the events, taking part in the webinars and being more active in the community. So we plan to have a good idea about how to do that soonish, and that we then can set up also kind of governance structure and code of conduct so that it's all transparent and clear how the community works together, who's responsible for what, and so on and so forth. With that, let's jump right into the topic. Sovereignty is a spectrum. And for me, that's actually a conclusion of a lot of discussions I had in the last months and seeing all the different perspectives coming together, seeing all the different, sometimes anger about the topic, sometimes the enthusiasm about the topic, but also seeing people being lost between reality and being a little bit disinformed. So just to very, very shortly wrap it up, and I think the definition is not perfect, but it gives just a glimpse of an idea of the bare minimum what we are talking about. That sovereignty we can see meanwhile in different contexts. We can see that in different contexts like cloud, data, or with the EU AI Act. Also, AI plays a very crucial role in sovereignty. Also, sovereignty plays a crucial role in AI, depending on how you see that. And it means that we talk about self-determination, right? It's that we have to control over our resources, digital resources, and own data. But that's sometimes more difficult than said. And data should, being subject to the law of a country where it actually stored or processed in. That's a relatively thing. Cloud services must respect also local jurisdiction. And we should provide control over AI models, algorithms, and the training data, which I found is actually the most difficult one, because we are practically saying like, you need to open up all your intellectual property so that we have control of something. And I think that's might be a little bit conflicting here. And this leads us also to a big but. Digital borders and local requirements, rules, they're all relative. For sure, I can store data in Frankfurt, but it might be that this data, while traveling to Frankfurt, passed by another country, like Luxembourg, right? Or was distributed through a content delivery network, which is all over the place, and maybe the shortest route was literally not Frankfurt, Munich, in my case. And then laws and national interests are often in a conflict with each other. For some lucky reason in Europe, we have more or less like 27 something countries that are all fine with each other's way of doing that. But as soon as we go one step beyond that border, it becomes very, very complicated and very, very conflicting. And to keep all those rules is a very hard thing. Data centers, operators, and also all third parties, they often use international services, and they are often also by themselves are international. So per law, it doesn't make a difference if someone has like an office in Germany, registered a German legal entity, but is owned 100% or even 51% from another country. It is like this entity is owned or is from another country. And last but not least, the true control is very difficult because it means that we need to be open, but that is conflicting with most business models. If I have developed something awesome, I want to keep my intellectual property. So if we try to break this down to some implementation hurdles, when we look into the data sovereignty space, data often flows automatically across the borders. As I said, CDNs is there a very, very easy example for it, because sometimes you really don't stuck in the mechanisms of a CDN. And you can say like, oh yeah, but hey, we have CDN network stuff, for example, for Germany. That's right. But what do you do with your customers that are from somewhere else? Or do you have just business in Germany? Cloud providers are also using the global infrastructures. Like network is often isolated from the data centers, and there are tons of very interesting network providers. Almost none of them are based in Europe. And we have often an unclear situation when we talk about cross-border communication and of data stuff. For example, if you as a German company process data and ship that to US, you actually have to ensure that the data protection that you use in Germany also is then done in US, for example. On the cloud side, it's also become very interesting because we talk here about the stereotype in some way that we have limited local providers with limited features and functionalities. I think that's often quite untrue. If you try to find the largest sum of services that all enterprises are using, we're talking about 20, 25 services. And that's more or less what every of the European cloud providers most of the time have already in place. Just because you do not have maybe an IoT core or a satellite whatever management thingy, this doesn't make the difference. Most companies don't need that. However, some of the smaller cloud providers are often not really enterprise ready on the identity and user management perspective. So what the expectation from enterprises is towards this management is often something different. And I think that's often more the problem rather than the features and functions. And there's no international expansion. So if you set up on a sovereign cloud provider, that's awesome, that's cool. You want to make business in US, you have to use something else. You want to make business in Asia, okay, cool, but you have to use a different provider. For AI, again, it becomes very difficult. To develop something entirely by yourself has extreme high cost, and every percentage you want to get better with an AI costs you in factor 2x more money. When you spend 10 million for the first version and you want to improve it a couple of times to be slightly better, then you have to spend suddenly 100 million. And then you want to make it 1-2% better, you have to spend 1 billion. Now, the European Union gives even not that amount of money to all countries for training some models. So you see there's already some problem in it. And we have also a lack of compute resources. We are in comparison to other countries, Germany itself, but also Europe, have less compute resources. It's very minor resources that are available. And the expectation is that we have to grow that by at least 4 times in the next years until 2020-30. The problem is that we even do not have projected that. Looking into US again, they need to grow the amount of computing capacity until 2030 by almost 5 times. They have 1/4 of this at least projected. That's more than what we have what we need and what we have planned. And then we have overarching problems sometimes, and which are becoming very interesting because we have a conflict between efficiency and control. It's sometimes complex because every now and then we have new regulations coming in. You see first some EU laws dropping, then national laws adjusting to it. So every 2 3 years there's some change in it, right? And the fragmentation across Europe also doesn't help to find one strengths, one entire strength together. And this caused then also that we have an economical pressure because in the last years the market is stagnating, and then we have to claim also to the sovereignty. This is conflicting. I cannot invest too much money to do something new while I actually try to find out how to survive with my business. So why sovereignty at all? And this is a question which we get quite often. The short answer and my personal route as a technician is, well, because we should have this capability, we should be able to build our own data center, run our own data center, and host our own stuff. I don't see any useful thing in a world where we are not able to do that by ourselves. However, I think that's the strongly opinionated, maybe idealistic perspective on the things. So what companies quite often see is that they have to comply with national security and critical infrastructure rules. So governments, for example, can ban software and hardware, which we have seen with Kaspersky in US or Huawei ZTE hardware in Europe, to take that out of the network communication for reasons. We see the very high requirements on NIS2 towards critical infrastructure in Germany. And as soon as it will be in place, it will be really interesting how different industries really want to put this into place. The unawareness here is still quite large, I would say. And countries like France show their even more dedication towards this topic with their Technom cloud framework. They're very, very clear, for example, about the ownership of a company. So a sovereign cloud provider in France, they cannot have more than 25% of one single American or a single Asian company on the stakeholders. And they cannot have more than 39% of a mixed amount of foreign shareholders. If it goes beyond that, it's not sovereign anymore. And this is a clear statement, which we, for example, in Germany do not have yet in that regards. The most driving perspective here is, I think, the legal certainty. Legal data transfer is often, or illegal data transfer is a topic. We have seen that on social media platforms like with Meta and TikTok. They have to pay the highest fines possible because they don't treat data well. But that's often the thing. If you do not have to comply to someone else's legal law, well, what it is to pay a few hundred million euro, but you have more business out of it, right? And that's what often we have here as perspective, what I'm also talk about in the economical dependencies in a second. We also have the EU Data Act that we have to comply with, together with a lot of other acts. So we have the CRA Act, you have the AI Act. So I like to say Europe likes to act at the moment, or is acting, but actually, if we want to be compliant with all of that, it becomes a difficult thing, and you'll have actually a very easy life in some way if you go for a sovereign cloud provider rather than to use something else, because many of the legal rules are already solved on the lower level. Last but not least, and I think that's what most of us are waiting for, is the transatlantic data privacy framework. Schrems 3 is still going on. The expectation is that somewhere in 25, maybe 26, the European judges are going to come with a conclusion. At the moment, looking into the history of that topic and how much awareness was raised, it might be that also here Schrems will kick Europe's ass in the transatlantic data privacy framework, which will leave a lot of European companies in a vacuum where they cannot exist easily. So they need to think about how to do with that. In the past years, we helped companies to define exit strategies. I think the future is like defining sovereign cloud strategies, because it will reduce the problem of being compliant with those rules. But it doesn't answer the question what to do with the stuff overseas. Economical dependencies. We see at the moment we have a trading war, and all kind of different levers are pulled to make this trading law being successful for the one or the other country. That might be a problem. And so we have to somehow find a way to deal with such kind of threats. Yeah. And then we have the German digital sovereignty strategy, which actually leads to this Huawei CTE exclusion of the German network providers. And I think that's a good one on the one hand side, but it has a major impact for those who are building the systems, right? And control transparency as its last. As I said, the EU AI Act has very high demands on control and openness in this regards. I think too much openness, but it's almost going beyond the borders of intellectual properties. And I think here we will see a lot of more complicated challenges coming up. I'm currently in the phase of doing some education to an AI officer, and those regulations are, I think, sometimes very hard to really comply with. Talking about, for example, opening up training data, or talking about opening up the algorithms used to train the model. The algorithm itself is not telling so much, but the weights you put in is valuable and so on. Nevertheless, that's where we come to the main topic for sovereignty is a spectrum. And the spectrum part is very relevant because I think with whomever you're discussing, normally you are having a right perspective. The thing is that you need to understand that the other person most likely is also right too. And I'm not a huge fan of saying like we have to accept everything, but about sovereignty, the perspective often dictates what we are seeing as a true fact and whatnot. So think about a lawyer, think about an entrepreneur or business managing director, think about the technician, or think about the end user. All of them are looking into sovereignty from different perspectives, from different angles in the end. And each of this perspective can be factually correct. So if you are a lawyer and you say like, okay, we have to comply with all the different laws, and there's no other rule, and I don't know, we do not accept a higher ownership of a company than 25% from a foreign company, you literally do not have any other chance to just choose a sovereign cloud provider, right? So if your lawyer is your consultant and tell you what you technically have to do, that's your way to go. Simple as that. And there's no argument you can put into where you can say like that lawyer is wrong. But there may be other perspectives where a managing director or a CEO have to balance maybe risks, right? And this is another perspective. Yes, we can do everything in a sovereign cloud provider in Europe, but we have a problem of distributing globally. We have a problem in distributing and growing globally. So what to do here? And another perspective is often the IT perspective. I like the tech part because I always say like if you spend a little bit more money on doing the things right, you wouldn't have a problem on the legal side. Putting in confidential computing will allow you an entirely 100% encryption of whatever is going on. But you still have always a risk to lose somewhere the control and lose somewhere some metadata. And metadata is actually sometimes more valuable than the actual data because you understand at which time somewhere something happening and so on and so forth. You can read a lot out of this information. And the implementations almost never are perfect. They almost never are really compliant and almost never 100% under control. So the IT perspective, although it's always a yes, we can do that, is also together with a big but saying it's just something which we actually should do all the time. It's not a question of being sovereign can be done with confidential computing. We should take care always that our data is at any point in time encrypted. And this points us to this diagram. I know it doesn't look like a spectrum. A spectrum is more like a band. But I think the dimensions are actually quite relevant here. And I see that I didn't translate one high point here for the technical expertise. So what we can see is the technical expertise. We can see the legal interpretation, and then the size of the bubbles. Taking about the risk readiness in some way. And the interpretation here is that we have something a strict interpretation, a strict perspective, a pragmatic, a hybrid, and a technical. You can already see that there's a high difference between strict and then the next levels, but there's actually also the same distance between technical and pragmatic. So a pragmatic one means already a huge difference for a legal perspective, for the strict perspective, and a huge difference for the technical perspective. What does it mean? Well, simple. You can match these points also to actual roles. I could also have written here there's a lawyer perspective, there's a business perspective, there's a user perspective, there's a technician perspective. But I think sometimes, as said, you depending on where you are, you can move somewhere around all of the spectrum, and this is just a stupid idea, a stupid representation how we see that. A lawyer quite often, for example, will not directly care about the technology itself. To a certain extent, that's why it's actually quite high in the technical part, but not infinitely. Right? A technician on the other side maybe do not care so much about all the legal interpretation. There's a self-interest of doing things right, doing things secure, and maybe a lot of technicians are convinced that they do already a higher standard than any law is asking for. But maybe the way how they're doing, they do not comply with law. Can be anything. And so, yeah, we have a multiple dimensions where we can really move in, where we can really live within. The reality is, in the end, that most companies at the moment are talking about the pragmatic or hybrid perspective, somewhere in the middle. Not too much law, not too much tech. What makes sense for my business? A hybrid approach here, for example, would be, okay, we are betting still on foreigner providers, going still in that direction, but where it is possible, we maybe will keep the very sensitive data on a regional provider and wire this up all with some cool network technology and so on and so forth. The pragmatic perspective would be, okay, where we can, we keep everything in Europe, and then we need to be smart how we handle products, whatsoever overseas. And this is like, I would say, the two perspectives where we see the most discussions going on. But the reality also is that we don't have yet met anyone who says like, okay, we completely will offboard from a foreign cloud provider and go all into a sovereign cloud provider, because the amount of costs are actually quite high to do that. Not because of the migration or not because of the costs of the cloud provider, but just because of the process and the time it will take. So the question then we always get asked is like, what works? And it's difficult to answer what works, because you always have to balance somehow between two things. You have the innovation side on the one hand, and you have the dependencies on the other. Do you want now to focus more on innovation, or do you want to solve your dependencies? You can try to do both, but it normally costs a lot of money. You have the availability versus sovereignty. So do I want to have a system, a service that is continuously everywhere available? Or do I want to be, independent, right? But maybe I cannot then grow to UK. I cannot grow to the Asian Pacific area. I cannot grow to US. Do I want to control the costs, or do I want just to control? Both things sometimes do not really work. If we look into a traditional cloud provider, we have tons of layers of security mechanisms to ensure the right control, but you also pay for every layer. It should come inclusively. And then you have compliance versions, efficiency. Being compliant often means process, paper, rules that you have to follow that will slow down you on the efficient side. From this perspective, I think we also have to think about, like, there are some myths when we see this discussion, and we have some reality. I don't want to go to all of them, but just to pick a few. For example, on the myth side, we have like the open source is automatically sovereign. That's not true. Most open source projects are financed by large tech companies. And Europe is actually a hidden champion in open source development, but we have one problem. We don't spend money on it. So if someone overseas decides to drop a project, the project will die in 1 or 2 years. And it doesn't matter that we have maybe interested people who are giving their time to develop it. If there's no budget for it, this project dies. Simple as that. US cloud providers are automatically secure. No, just because they have tons of experience and do a lot of cloud computing since many years, it also doesn't mean that it's automatically secure. The same thing counts for German cloud providers are automatically secure. It's not really true, but it's sometimes arguments which I see in this high-level political discussions to the one side or the other side, right? If there's something, say it's automatically this and that, it's most likely not really like this. Looking into reality part, every cloud solution has international dependencies, for example, hardware. It's one of the most heard arguments saying like, all the sovereignty is for the trash can because your hardware is coming from the US too. And I think I posted a few weeks ago about it. It's not true. It's not like that. Your hardware, the design comes from US. The person in the end who's selling you that comes from US. The machines who manufacture the important parts like CPUs and GPUs are crafted in Europe. That stuff is produced usually in Taiwan. Some of the components for the server comes from China. The silicon manufacturing, all the liquids which you need for that come from Japan. South Korea plays also a very big role for some components into it. Then you manufacture it, sometimes in China, sometimes in Taiwan, and ship it somewhere. And even the chip design, depending on what we are talking about, even this doesn't really come from US. We have Intel chips and NVIDIA, but the rest is like partially UK-based, partially open source. So it's kind of complicated to say like, this is just pure, having this pure dependency somewhere. And the zero trust architecture reduces but doesn't eliminate all sovereign issues. This is also something which we have to talk about because it's an argue which I just recently had saying like, we just built a zero trust, always on, everywhere encrypted architecture, and then sovereignty is easy for us. And like, but you just fulfill security requirements. That has nothing to do with the sovereignty. What are you using for it? Which tools do you use for it? Do you use an open source tool that is depending on one US company that spends every year €5 million or dollars for developing it? I'm sorry, but we're very far away from being sovereign. So there's a lot of myths in the room, a lot of reality checks which we have to do. I think the most important part is that we should always slip into this fear discussion, right? This the bad foreign government will sneak peek into my data center and do whatever they do. It happens quite less. Well, it happens, but it happens quite less. Nevertheless, what is more a problem is industry espionage, for example, right? Nevertheless, in uncertain times like we have now, and unfortunately here the technology is very tightly coupled to technology, politics is very tightly coupled to technology, where we cannot really trust in the mental stability of world leaders, it is not so unrealistic just to think a little bit about the what if, because it can happen and it was already ordered. So which decision should we take and how we can move forward? To find your perspective on like the spectrum, I think 4 questions can be a good starting point with. First, which data we're actually talking about? What is it? Is it sensible? Is it kind of just like lightweighted data? It maybe already is a very, very good starting point. What regulations do we need to comply with? Which budget do we have? And which expertise do we have? And all of this together leads to a different standpoint in the spectrum. But And this is also a perspective we need to be aware of. When we take a look into the future, the spectrum will also shift. And this is very, very sure. It's something that we can see driven in Europe through new EU regulation that are step by step getting introduced. But sovereignty is not only something that belongs to Europe. Other countries are also building their own sovereign perspective, their own sovereign world. So if you take like the top 10 largest country on this planet, practically all of them have guidelines. Whatever is critical, do it in the country, do it with your own country resources. For some reasons, in Europe, we are like, oh, we are the only one who's thinking about it. No, we just make it just a really big thing out of it. But other countries also do it for a good reason and to protect themselves and protect them for some free will of others. Technology develops, confidential computing getting more and more accessible, becoming more and more standard. For example, you can do confidential computing in H100s or Blackwell GPU architectures with almost no loss of performance. And frankly speaking, even if you lose some performance, this doesn't matter so much because actually most GPUs are over provisioned or underutilized. So use what you have. Geopolitical tensions, we said already enough. And then we have also economical realities that from time to time change. If a country is doing well, the country do invest into new products, features, is expanding, is growing. If an economy does not so well, you have to reshape, you have to consolidate. And so all of these elements are shaping the perspective and moving your target and moving your positioning in a sovereign cloud and what makes sense for taking a position, moving you back and forth. My recommended actions for you, which you can and should have a look on, is first find your position, determine your position. Where do I stand on the spectrum? Am I more on the legal part, which is maybe something where, for example, banks and insurance and critical infrastructure will find themselves? Or am I more on the technical part, talking about SaaS companies, talking about I do not want to be bad, but like lightweighted companies that have lightweighted products and services that do not deal with so much serious customer data. You also should understand why are you there. And that sounds stupid, but it's sometimes good to reflect on your own personal company history, how you have come to this position and what are the information that influence actually your perspective on it. Because sometimes you might understand that an information which is like a few years old have majorly driven you into this direction and now you're stuck there without moving away. But the information is outdated or even is false. For maintaining flexibility and the question, how can we move? I often hear also, hey, it costs a lot to go from one cloud provider to another. And yes, obviously, you cannot just, like if you're an enterprise, take your whole data center from A to B and migrate it away. There's also too much hard-coded stuff. Many large enterprises have a history in cloud provider, and with that, they are literally, woven into the cloud provider itself. But you have domains, businesses that wants to extend, that needs to grow, and that maybe have never considered about going into the cloud because there were too much uncertainties, too much regulations they do not want to face with. And this is exactly also the big chance I see for the sovereign cloud market. Are companies, high-tech companies, small and medium-sized companies that are actually now on the point of like, hey, I maybe should go to cloud. And hey, there are, meanwhile, some really good sovereign cloud products that I can use to go to. Right? They solve my regulation problem, they solve my legal problem. I don't have to worry too much about that part. And I can focus purely on features, functions, and growing my business. And then this leads to a continuous evaluation. You should continuously check up your positioning. Where are you? And understand, like, do we need to reposition? Can we reposition ourselves? Do we can move to another perspective, or are there new influence on the market that maybe turn around my position and my thinking of sovereign, and how do we want to do that? With that, we are slowly coming to an end. Thank you very much for your time, for being here. Please follow us on the LinkedIn page and on Luma. LinkedIn will keep you posted about all the different stuff. And if you find there are 150 followers, we finally can also stream on LinkedIn. On Luma, we will always announce the events. It makes it for us easy to keep a track on how many people are actually interested in, and we can share further information through the platform. And if we do live events, then we can even use it there. If you want to join the community, or would like to host a webinar by yourself, or have an idea or even a wish for a topic that we should present, you can write us at hello@sovereigncloud.community and address your ideas, wishes, plans to contribute. As said, we are currently working on setting up all the rest for the community to bring it up and live. But we want to start now with contributing and putting up some content, raising the awareness, raising the interest, and communicate out there to the world that there are people that do not want to show you weird stacks, that do not want to sell you directly some products, but more interested in gaining together some knowledge, make it shareable, and yeah, put every country forward. If you're also like native speaking in any other languages, feel free to step up. As said, we would like to bring the community aspect to more or less all European countries, because we have also found out we need to empower and celebrate every country's unique perspective, mentality, and culture. And that's done through language. And therefore, we need to emphasize the language aspects here. With that, again, thank you very much. And I wish you a very nice day. And if it's not too early, then I also wish you a very nice weekend.